Okay, thank you, and once again, welcome to today's IAB webinar, Mobile Engagement Currencies You Can Trust, How to Create and Cultivate Sustainable Brand Engagement. Today we're presented by IAB member S4M USA and supported by global media agency Mediacom. First, a real quick overview of the IAB webinar program. IAB webinars provide a unique opportunity to learn from industry experts. Presenters represent member companies who use this channel to take participants on a deep dive into the most relevant topics in digital advertising. Many of these sessions coincide with the work being done on IAB's committees and councils, and to get involved, please email membership@iab.com. Over the next 60 minutes or so, our panel will explore how to qualify and measure mobile engagements to create and cultivate sustainable brand engagement. Our experts will explore questions such as, what does it mean to put the user first in mobile campaigns? How can advertisers define and trade with the right metrics to achieve campaign success? Will this booming industry be sustainable without advertiser confidence and user acceptance? Attendees will walk away with practical advice and strategies to create and cultivate effective engagements. As a real quick housekeeping item, we should have time to take a few questions at the end. To submit a question, please type your query directly into the questions tab in the webinar panel. We'll select questions at the end of the presentation based on time and availability. So prior to handing off to our panelists, I'm going to introduce our moderator, Joe Laszlo. Joe is the IAB's VP of Industry Initiatives. In this role, Joe supervises the work and output of the majority of the IAB's committees and councils. Joe helps to set the agenda for these critical industry groups and ensures the high quality of their deliverables, which take the form of research, best practices development, thought leadership seminars, white papers, and other activities. So without further ado, Joe, take it away.
Terrific. Thank you, John. You've left me without a lot to say, at least not about myself. In the role that I play currently at the IAB, I help stitch together all of the work of the IAB's 20 or so committees and councils, but I have to say that mobile is a special passion and interest of mine. Prior to stepping into my current VP role last fall, I was director of the IAB's Mobile Center of Excellence, and so questions of how mobile is growing, how to deliver mobile advertising experiences that consumers respond to positively, and most importantly, how to measure the success of those mobile advertising experiences are, again, things that I care a lot about and things that all the IAB's committees and councils care about a lot as well. So my main role today is just to keep an eye on questions that come in from the audience and kind of moderate those for our speakers. But I'm going to get out of the way now and let Fred and Tom tell you about the topic and take you through their perspective on it. So thank you both very much for joining us. And Fred, to you.
Sure. Thanks, Joe. Hello, everyone. So yeah, this webinar will focus on mobile engagement currencies. I think we all know that there's still a gap between time spent on mobile, I think about 24% of share against other touch points, and the share of ad spend in mobile, which is about 8% if we hear what Mary Meekers is saying. I think there's multiple reasons for that gap. One of those reasons, I think, is the lack of transparency in the marketplace, with some ad fraud and also obviously the rise of ad blocking. I think another reason is the lack of trust with clear metrics that can show clear mobile ad efficiency. And the objective of this webinar will be to update you on how to bring trust and transparency through user experience and advertiser ROI with real metrics that should help the mobile ad marketplace to grow in a sustainable fashion. So to present this webinar, it will be myself, Fred Joseph. I'm the CEO of S4M USA, and Tom Seyfried, Chief Client Officer of Mediacom USA. Tom and I have been working together for, I think, about a decade. We were both part of the Publicis Group based in London before moving to the US. Myself as the Global Chief Digital Officer of Zenith Opportunity Worldwide, and Tom was the Managing Director of Zenith Opportunity International. I think you can hear from my accent that I am French, and you will soon hear from Tom's accent he is a Brit. So no comment here will be made on the Brexit. No questions at the end will be taken on that particular topic. Just a few words on our respective companies. S4M, Success for Mobile, is a mobile programmatic solution. We have just been awarded the MRC, the Media Rating Council accreditation, which makes us the only mobile technology in the world to have the accreditation on its entire chain of technology, with 4 KPIs accredited: impressions, clicks, opens, post-click conversion. And this gives us, I think, a unique credit for the theme that we're going to cover in this webinar. And Tom, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Tom. I'm the Chief Product Officer of Mediacom. I've 16 years experience in the business. And at Mediacom, we think about systems thinking. So how does the overall ecosystem of client communication come together to deliver improved results for the client, whether that result is sales or brand improvement? How does the overall system work together? So today I'll be talking a bit about the context within which advertisers are approaching their mobile investment. And Fred will talk a bit more about how we turn those broader objectives into specific measures people can implement to ensure effectiveness in the campaigns.
So the question is, at this point, are we in a sustainable industry? It's clearly a big industry. $100 billion spent in mobile ad this year, from $70 billion last year. This is eMarketer source, and probably around $200 billion spent in 2020. But to be sustainable, I think there's a critical need to elaborate on what the metrics or the currencies should be to assess its efficiency. Mobile technology clearly is not the same as desktop technology. The way to count impressions are different, and to ensure that this market sustains its growth, I think it's absolutely critical that specific metrics are set clearly and understood by all in the most transparent fashion.
So when we think about how we build a sustainable system, for every major ad medium that we have, it really has 2 things. You have user acceptance. The users accept the advertising as part of their overall experience and they tolerate it or engage directly with it. And you have advertiser ROI. So for every campaign, in aggregate, advertisers deliver positive ROI for the money which they invest in the medium. Not for every campaign, but in aggregate across the majority of campaigns they do. They deliver positive ROI. And when you think about that, every major ad medium has these 2 things. If you think historically, television, obviously the biggest medium currently, has high user acceptance and has high advertiser ROI. Advertising is part of television, even if people don't want to watch it outside of the Super Bowl, they do accept that advertising is a key part of the ecosystem. And if you think about the relatively more recent major changes in the marketplace, let's take search. That has user acceptance of advertising built in, because in the end, the ads are part of they're part of the experience, because users often can't even tell that they're clicking on ads. So search is a great example of something which has user acceptance for the advertising and delivers very strong advertiser ROI, particularly on lower funnel. So when we think about mobile, it's challenging because there's a number of different formats within the ecosystem, and it's a relatively new channel still. So we have to try and deliver these 2 things to continue to drive forward industry growth, to see the industry grow in the same speed that other digital media have grown, and really to take its rightful place when you think about the amount of time that people engage with the channel. So let's take the first of those, user acceptance. The first thing to say is that users love using their mobile devices. We all know this. But it's interesting to put it in context. In the last 4 years, we've seen an increase in by 2.5 hours daily in the usage of mobile devices, smartphones. And when you place that in context, that's really interesting. I don't think there's ever been in history a bigger change in the way that individuals use their time in developed and developing markets. If we think about television, television is watched 4 or 5 hours a day on average. Reality is it took 30 years for it to increase by 2.5 hours a day. If we look at the change in the way people behaved during the Industrial Revolution, it took 50 to 60 years for people to work less as they moved out of agriculture into industry. So this really is an unprecedented shift in the way people spend their days. And as part of that, you need to think about what it is that has driven that. And it's the intimacy, it's the accessibility, it's the compulsiveness, frankly, of the experience that you get on a mobile device. And consumers love it. The question for us is, how much do they accept advertising and do they like it? The reality is, they would really, probably, for many of them, rather have no advertising at all in this channel. So if we think about, if we ask customers what they, consumers what they want, you see that 55% would really generally find it annoying and disruptive as a per e-marketer. Another 11% said it just doesn't bother them. So you see that they're not interested in receiving advertising, they don't particularly like it, and as a result, often they try and block it. There's 14 million, I mean, there's loads of statistics out there about ad blocking of various degrees of accuracy. But as an example, 14 million active monthly ad blockers in Europe and North America, 419 million globally. So from something which started off as a solution by Eastern European online gamers who wanted to speed up their internet connection, we've got something which is threatening, to some degree, the viability of the business, particularly when you look at emerging markets like China and India and Indonesia, but is increasingly common in Europe and North America. And in fact, the IAB is addressing this through things like Project Link. A key part of the challenge of the mobile ecosystem is that users don't all accept or value the ads, and as a result, they block them because they can. So, on the other hand, if you ask the question another way around and you say, do you want personalization? How likely are you to click on ads if they're personalized? And you see very different results. You see that when you compare a product which I've never heard of, 69% of people are not likely to click with an ad about a product or brand that I know and is tailored to my personal preferences and shopping habits. You find that in that case, 70% will consider clicking. So when you think about it from the other direction and the ability of mobile to deliver personalization, actually consumers find that attractive. And that points to part of the solution. The other thing which we have to think about in the way that consumers use their mobile devices is what they're actually doing on the device. So if you think about, and this is data from Monetate, you look at where retail website traffic comes from, it's increasingly coming from smartphones and tablets, and that, particularly smartphones, reflects the improved consumer experience and digital experience that you get on the mobile web in the last year and the investment that retailers have made. But even when you look at people converting to purchase, yes, it's increasing slightly, but the majority are converting to purchase on desktop and on tablet. And that reflects the fact that when we think about advertising on smartphones particularly, we need to think about its role in the overall ecosystem and what actions consumers may be taking off device. So as we think about both of these things, what you see is that we need an approach which is really driven by, which respects what consumers want out of the device, which is, it's a very addictive and useful device for them, respects the user flow that they're after, but also looks at what they're doing both on device and off device. Fred.
So with that, I think advertisers have to bear in mind the specificity of mobile when serving advertising. And in real, the specificity of mobile campaign is born from the intimate nature of the mobile device. I think that the intimacy is making mobile advertising very specific with very specific rules that might not necessarily apply to other media touchpoints. And this intimacy, I think, means that we have to think people first. How do I, how do you, how does anyone react to receiving an ad on a mobile device? This is absolutely critical to keep in mind while planning a mobile campaign. Thinking people first means planning mobility rather than planning mobile device campaign. So what do we mean by planning mobility? Well, rule number one is thinking context. Think of a commuter snacking mobile content on his way to work on a Monday morning, and this particular person is a very different target audience than the same individual shopping in the mall on a Saturday afternoon. It's the same person, yes, it's the same device, but that person will be receptive to very different ways of engagement on his or her intimate device, depending on that particular context. So with that in mind, the creative message has to be tailored to the individual in the specific context. And to that point, DCO, digital creative optimization, is critical on mobile. I think we absolutely need to avoid simple translations of television or desktop ads that won't be particularly relevant on the individual mobile device in the particular context. I think it's absolutely essential to be able to customize the message on the go to ensure that we can bring the right added value to the very specific individual. And without customized messages, I think it's very easy to annoy the individual and to be, at the end of the day, counterproductive to the advertiser. It also obviously can trigger usage of ad blocking, such as Tom mentioned just now. Also, mobile creative execution are quite often poor. We need to be candid about that. I think especially when you compare those creative executions to the great ads on television where advertisers have spent millions in production. So I think it's essential to be on par on mobile with awesome HTML5 rich media ads that can really be compared to fantastic ads that people have been able to watch on other media. And the third rule, I think, is making sure that frequency capping is constantly monitored to ensure best ROI, but also to ensure that we avoid repetition that will trigger irritation of the audience. And building on the frequency capping rule, retargeting has to be used, I think, with immense caution. When retargeting audiences, we absolutely need to remember the intimacy of the device. And this is true for mobile to mobile retargeting, but it's even more important for desktop to mobile retargeting, which is even more contentious. I can give you a real-life example of someone I know who recently told me a story which I thought was really interesting. He was browsing on a Home Depot-like website with his desktop at home on the weekend, and then got retargeted on his mobile with ads of items he had been checking on his desktop. Well, the retargeting on his mobile intimate device was perceived by that person as intrusive and even, I quote, creepy. And clearly, at the end of the day, counterproductive for the brand. So now, I think last point on retargeting, and it's also a very critical one, is to know when to end a mobile campaign. We all have our own experiences of campaigns that are lasting too long and continuing to send advertisements even after we've made a purchase. I think Joe from the IAB gave me his own experience of going on holiday in Greece a few weeks back, lucky him, and he's still getting ads related to booking his trip. Well, clearly this is very annoying, and not only the advertisers' dollars are wasted, but the spend is counterproductive. So with that said, in terms of planning requirements, it's also very important to assess that the advertiser's 3 most meaningful KPIs are verified from a technology standpoint. And at S4M, we recently ran an ad verification survey towards 1 billion impressions that were served on mobile across all major DSPs and tested across those KPIs, which are brand safety, device targeting, and viewability. And the results were pretty astonishing. The first KPI tested, brand safety. Well, the results we got back, again, on the basis of 1 billion impressions, were that 5% of the HTML5 and 40% of the static impressions were served on unsafe environments. The second KPI, device targeting or OS targeting. Well, the results came back with about 10% of the impressions served were actually displayed on the wrong device or the wrong OS. So let's say a format that was customized for an Android was actually served on an iOS or the other way around. Or a format that was customized for an iPhone 6 was actually sent to an iPhone 4. Well, with that, when that happens, clearly the ad just doesn't render. And it's simply dollars that are wasted. Third KPI, viewability, though, I think hottest topic on the mobile ecosystem at the moment. Well, about 20 to 30% of HTML5 ads were simply not viewable to the user as not rendering on the screen. And I'll come to viewability standards in detail in a moment. But you can see that with random tests across these three KPIs, brand safety, device targeting, and viewability, there's a lot of advertising dollars that are spent and simply wasted, which, if not addressed, is a huge pushback on the sustainability of the marketplace growth. Tom?
So when we think about user acceptance and what's going to make advertising on the mobile devices more acceptable to consumers, really it's about respecting the experience they love. They love using their devices, and it's clear that we need a set of measurement currencies that encourage a behavior that respects that love for their device. So as Fred said, it's around let's make sure that we're advertising in the right context, with the right creativity, at the right frequency, and respecting from the advertiser's perspective the brand safety, device specificity, and viewability. So that's really the user acceptance. How can we create a better experience for users? The next question is, how can we make sure that advertisers make money out of it? Otherwise, they're not going to invest. So if we move on to advertiser ROI, here we're really thinking about what is going to allow a return on investment which is greater than the money which goes in. So when we think about return on investment on the device, when we think about return on investment for advertisers, clearly a big chunk of that, or a chunk of it, is on the device itself. And you see that it's growing very rapidly, 28%. This is from the Group M data. But it's still a small fraction of the overall investment. E-commerce is still much larger, by which I mean desktop. And retail sales in general, of course, much greater. And this is predominantly retail without even considering some product lines where you can't really buy online, like automotive. So when we think about the return which the advertiser is getting for their advertising, just like in all channels, the return isn't only on device. It's not only from the click, even if that's an important part of it. So when we think about what that return is, really they kind of bucket into three big chunks. Exposure, so have I exposed my message to the audience correctly? Have I exposed it to enough of the audience? Have I exposed it to the appropriate amount of frequency? Has that generated an action? So has that action, whether that's a click, for example, whether it's an app install in some cases, whether it's a visit to store, a physical visit to store. And then finally, it's driven sales, it's driven long-term value. When we think about these objectives, which are all linked, which the advertiser has, and that's why Mediacom, we look at this from a systems thinking perspective, we really also need to think within the mobile ecosystem, what measures will address these specific buckets, and Fred's going to talk to us a bit about that.
Sure. So if we now look at beyond these principles, and if we have a look at details in ad metrics, the point here is to make sure that the metrics measured are not just extensions of desktop metrics, but precisely designed for mobile so that they can be truthful, trustable, and transparent for advertisers. So starting with the ability of the ad. On a desktop, the impression is counted from the bid request. This is really important to keep in mind. On desktop, once the bid is won, the impression is served and counted. But on mobile, it's very different. The bid might be won and the impression might be served, but that doesn't mean that the impression is actually rendered on the mobile device. Very important to keep in mind. And to that point, it's absolutely critical that mobile impressions are counted only when they are rendered on the device. And this is why it's so important to use mobile-specific ad servers and not desktop ad servers that will count impressions when the bid is won and impressions are served, but not necessarily rendered on the device. Now, when the impression is rendered, it still doesn't necessarily mean that it's viewable to the mobile user device. And this is why it is, again, critical to use mobile-specific ad servers, but also ad servers that are accredited by the MRC, the Media Rating Council, meaning that the impressions are counted and charged to clients with impressions that are audited to the standard set by the MRC. So what do we mean by viewability? Well, viewability is seen in general by advertisers as an opportunity to see the ad. Well, at S4M, we're very supportive of the guideline set by the MRC that says that 50% of the pixels of an ad has to be viewable for at least 1 second on the screen. With that, at S4M, we're going further than 50% pixels, and we're actually setting our own rule where we are only charging our clients when the impressions are loaded 100% for at least 1 second. And I think WPP and Mediacom are setting their very restrictive rules and guidelines as well to that point. The second key metric or currency is the click. On average, about 20 to 30% of the clicks on mobile are made, you can keep that in mind as well, are either robots or accidental clicks. Accidental clicks meaning people clicking on the little arrow on the right-hand side of the ad, trying to get rid of the ad, actually clicking on the ad. That's called fat finger in our jargon. There's also the clicks that are actually not rendering because the person clicking is in an area where the connection is not good enough, and the person just won't wait for the page to load. So here again, it's absolutely critical for advertisers to use tracking technologies that are MRC certified to avoid those issues. If the above process has been followed, then the CTR, the click-through rate, which is obviously the third key metric here, will be what we call a true CTR. So let's now have a look at what we call post-ad metrics. So post-ad metrics certified by the MRC presuppose that all in-ad metrics, as described in my previous chart, are actually certified. And at this point, I just want to mention that S4M is the only mobile technology in the world to have the MRC accreditation on post-ad metrics. The first post-ad metric is the qualification for a landing page on a mobile web. And for being qualified as a real landing, that page will have to be fully loaded with 100% of the pixels for at least 1 second on the device. And with that qualification, we can also certify that the click and the click-through rate previously described are net of all accidental clicks. So remember when I was explaining that clicks have to be net of fraud and net of fat fingers? Well, when someone clicks accidentally on an ad, or when someone is in an area with poor connection, they will simply not wait for the landing page to load 100% and will just reverse to come out of the process. With the guarantee that the landing page is fully loaded, you also guarantee that the advertisers are not charged for such false clicks. And at S4M, we're the only ones to be able to guarantee that process with the MRC accreditation. The second post-ad metric is the install of an app, mostly used for client acquisition. Here again, the install, to be real, has to be going through the process I've just explained to be MRC certified. And the last post-ad metric is the open of the app, mostly used for m-commerce through retargeting people that have already installed the app. Here again, the process explained has to be followed to be MRC certified. So with all the above metrics and process followed, it is then possible to go even deeper in the qualification of the user engagement of mobile with tracking elements such as shares, calls, getting directions, etc., etc. And with that, I will hand over to Tom, who has a great live football example to talk about.
So one of the great things, of course, about mobile is also how we use it to track not only what happens on device, but also how all the advertising ecosystem is affecting the results which the client and the advertiser are looking for. So this is a really nice example which some of you may have seen from Foursquare. As you will know, Chipotle have had some challenges with their food chain integrity, and as a result, they've suffered a decline in footfall. And the folks on Wall Street were, of course, very interested to understand how much that decline was going to be. In the end, in an operationally leveraged business like QSR, if you get substantial declines in footfall, it has a disproportionate impact on your profitability because, of course, lease and all the rest of it, and property is a big chunk of your costs, and they're fixed. So in order to track that, the street had believed that there would be about 22% reduction in footfall, but using mobile tracking, using place visit rates, so understanding which opt-in mobiles have moved in and out of specific locations, Foursquare were able to estimate that a 30% reduction, and in fact the actual numbers came in at 29.7. So you begin to see how this kind of tracking allows us to understand overall effectiveness as well as mobile effectiveness. Another example could be car dealerships. If you're the advertiser, you want to drive, often in many cases these days, leads which are coming through the website, through mobile commerce to your dealers. But the reality is only about 17% of car sales are attributable to leads, and of that 17%, of all the people who could become leads, many don't, because unless you're a masochist, you don't want to be harassed by the dealer for the next 4 weeks following your giving a lead on the manufacturer's website. So we lose track of people as they go into the dealership. Equally, if we look at sales as a metric, there's a whole load of other things which could have affected sales. Did the people buy the car they actually went in thinking they were going to buy? Was the leasing deals good and the finance deals good? Was the product itself good enough? So there's a whole load of different measures which separate advertising effectiveness from actual sales performance. Footfall, on the other hand, is a much closer measure of advertising performance, because you're looking at the demand which the advertising has generated, and you're seeing how that demand has pushed people, in this case, to the dealer or to a Chipotle. So that's a great example of how mobile allows us to measure off device and indeed see the effectiveness of the advertising on mobile. But when you think about that role in the broader ecosystem, really attribution modeling becomes absolutely key. And attribution modeling has come on leaps and bounds over the recent years, starting with what all of us really do, like last click attribution. So how do we track the person who's clicked last and therefore the CPC, adding in the effect of exposures in digital which have happened previous to the person making the final click in attribution 2.0. Increasingly people use cross-device attribution now, whether that's deterministic or probabilistic, and that allows us to get a much better idea of what kind of mobile interactions happen prior to a visit to a website. And you saw, for example, in the conversion data I presented earlier, that a large amount of people are seeing stuff on and interacting on the mobile device, but then actually converting on desktop. And finally, increasingly cross-channel attribution, where you're taking in, again, either probabilistically or deterministically, all the different forms of exposure that a potential customer has through the path to purchase. So again, in an automotive example, what TV advertising have they seen, what digital advertising have they seen, what mobile advertising have they seen, to result in them either visiting a dealer, becoming a lead, or even purchasing a vehicle. So it increasingly allows us to look at mobile's view of the overall ecosystem, and as we're able to do that, we're able to understand and justify the value to advertisers, show true ROI of the channel. So when we think about advertiser ROI, it's really about effective exposure measurement. Are people seeing the ads at the right level of frequency, and are enough people seeing them? The right level of engagement measurement, so on device, are they clicking? Are they exposed for a decent amount of time? What actions are they taking post-click? And then effective measurement off device, which is how are we giving mobile its full credit in the broader ecosystem and using it as a measure of other channels as well as what's happened on device. So when we think about those two together, if we're going to drive a sustainable industry, it needs to deliver, it needs to respect the experience they love, and it needs to deliver those different measurement elements to allow advertisers to calculate ROI correctly. So I think Fred's just going to close, and then we'll have some questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think in conclusion, by respecting the user with what we call a people-first approach, and with unlocking more value for advertisers through qualified engagement and certified metrics, we will definitely be able to bring trust and transparency to mobile currency and move forward with sustainable growth for this mobile ecosystem. Thank you very much, and very open to taking questions now.
Great, thank you, Fred, and thank you, Tom. We do have some time for some questions, and I will turn it over to Joe, who's been monitoring our question panel. So, Joe, have we got any questions to pose to the panelists?
Yep, there's a number from attendees already. I'm going to actually play moderator privilege and ask one of my own as the first question, though. And I want to come back to the Media Rating Council and accreditation. And question for Fred. You know, the IAB and MRC have been great partners for a really long time now around setting standards for the industry. I've sat in on accreditation review panels that the MRC puts together, so I know from that side just how intensive and deep and detailed. Can you talk a little bit more about, you know, kind of what prompted your company to go through the time and expense and effort of being audited, and, you know, kind of where you see it bringing benefits for your business and for your clients?
Sure. So it's a painful process, definitely. It has taken probably about a year or more to get the accreditation on those 4 KPIs that are impressions, clicks, opens, and posted conversion. I think it's super important for us, but also you know, for the industry to be able to work with partners, clients, advertisers, and media agencies to work with partners that have that certification, because it gives the guarantee precisely that the metrics that we talked about in this presentation have been audited and certified to the highest standard of reliability. And like I said, there's still that gap that we mentioned between spend on mobile and time spent on mobile. One of the reasons probably is a sort of lack of trust in the currencies, and being able to work with technology partners that have that accreditation, you know, gives a great credit to those partners and great credit to the advertisers that the dollars that are spent with them are actually spent in an accurate way. And I know WPP has a great standard as well, has put a lot of effort and time with setting viewability standards, for example. So I think that working with, you know, credible partners that have been through the accreditation is absolutely critical, not just for the partners, but for the entire marketplace.
Great. Okay. Great answer. We'll go to a question from an attendee. It's sort of a challenging question, actually. So
let's get that question then.
Well, it's not about Brexit, at least. But it is a question about why we're doing a mobile-specific webinar at this stage, or focusing on a mobile-specific topic at this stage of the industry's evolution. Shouldn't we just be thinking all cross-platform all the time at this point? And so, phrasing it like a question, kind of where are the issues that are still specific to mobile that the IAB and the industry and your companies need to address, distinct from the cross-platform world?
So I can take that question. I think it's a great question. And not a question that I had prepared, to be very clear. But what I can say is my hope is that at some point we won't be able to have such seminars. At this point of time, with what we've been through, all the specificities that we've been mentioning in this webinar, the differences between the way we track mobile versus desktop, huge differences. And it's not as simple or clear-cut, you know, to just, you know, think, you know, we're just going to add the mobile into the cross-channel planning. If that particular mobile pot of money is not spent with the right KPIs and with the right technologies behind, then, like I said, there's a lot of discrepancies. There's a lot of dollars that will be wasted for the advertiser. So I think that we're moving in the world of mobile, so it's a transition period. At some point, I think there won't be, a need for such webinars because everything will be mobile anyway. And the mobile technology probably at some point will take over from the desktop technology, I think, and I hope, because it's much more accurate. But for now, I think there's still a need for education and for a focus on what are the real metrics, what are the real technologies on mobile.
Yeah, but I agree, and I would also add that the reality is yes, there's a specific role for media in the overall system of advertising that we're using, partially because the tech is different, as you say, but also partially because the user experience is different, and the way that people are using their mobile is different from the way we use desktop. You saw that in some of the data that I presented. But also this is one of my least favorite phrases, but the use case for the advertiser can be different, because actually they may well be using it for a more immediate in-store communication or couponing or something like that, which is actually a very different kind of set of measures that you're using for desktop. So that location-based element gives a different angle to the way that advertisers may use mobile within the overall creation of an effective set of advertising around a consumer's path to purchase.
Yeah, no, certainly I take away from kind of what you've been saying about creative, and Fred, what you've been saying about kind of the need for mobile specific solutions, ad serving wise, that there's a big difference between planning and execution. I think from the IAB's POV, we'd say all media campaigns, all consumer outreach should be planned very cross-platform, very holistically, but there's details around how you execute where mobile is still a different world and still merits some close attention. So I think that's great. Tom, next question, I'll start with you. Somebody wants to do a little bit more, a little deeper perspective from you on attribution and kind of where you see kind of the next frontiers of attribution lying, and what you really think is feasible with today's technology versus what's still under development as far as really kind of tracking on device to off device.
Yeah, I mean, I think well, firstly, I'm not a statistical attributor or attribution specialist, but what I would say about its overall role is, for me, it's becoming much more sophisticated. It's bringing in many more parts of the influence on the purchase journey. I think it is, one of the key challenges in attribution at the moment is, at the moment you model large chunks of data. You've got solutions like Catalina, which will give you a much better view, for example, on different types of purchases. So are they brand purchases? Are they brand and competitor purchases? Are they, let's take OTC, for example, are they generics purchases? And what's the interplay, and what kind of different types of messaging do you have to give to them, and frequency and timing to make them change their brand decision. So one part of it is, within the digital space, the attribution is becoming much more granular, and that allows you to carve out smaller and smaller audiences and work out exactly what's effective for those subgroups rather than from one advertiser, or one kind of generic route. And the second part is that as we move increasingly to unique IDs within the way that we're serving advertising, you get much more ability to append data to each of those IDs. And the moment you can do that, you're able to see what's that consumer's journey been. So that's an extension of bringing offline data in to the kind of small micro groups that I was just describing in that example for OTC. So as an example, if you were able to identify obviously a PII compliant unique ID, and you're able to append to that, they've seen your advertising on mobile, they've seen your advertising on desktop, and also that they have or haven't purchased, but also that they that they are part of, if you take something like Rentrack, we're able to see the TV viewing in much more granularity. They're in a household who's been exposed to a set of ads. You're bringing in all the different parts of the puzzle about what has made them make that brand choice. And the moment you can bring in all these parts, you can get much more effective in tailoring the set of exposures that you give to an individual customer or an individual small group of customers to make them choose your brand instead of a different brand, and therefore drive sales. So I think that's really where attribution is going. It's becoming more granular, more based on large data sets rather than research, kind of broader research based. and more based on unique IDs. And I think when we get to that, it's a really exciting moment because you'll really be able to understand, the old like 50% of my advertising is wasted, 50% I just don't know which 50. You be able to get to really, for people who have specific purchase patterns, who live in specific areas, specific demographic characteristics, what kind of level of exposure am I likely to need to make them change their brand choices? So it's a really exciting part of the attribution.
Excellent. Fred, anything to add as far as the state of the art of attribution?
So I'll be a bit radical or a bit controversial in the way I'm going to answer that question. I think that this is a question that is a temporary issue. I think that with the migration of audiences to mobile usage, I think that in the next 2, 3, maybe 5 years, I don't know, I don't have a crystal ball, but attribution won't be that much of an issue because the audience would actually be online through their mobile device, whether it's a smartphone, it's a tablet, or it's a connected object. I don't know, but it's going to be mobile anyway. And so with that, I think that cross-device attribution is, in my head, a temporary issue.
I can see that. Great. I'll kind of finish with a small commercial for the IAB. We're working on an update to a primer on attribution that we published a few years ago, so there will be an updated version of that out hopefully in the summertime, and looking at advanced attribution topics through a dedicated town hall probably in Q3 or Q4. So it's definitely a topic that all IAB members are interested in these days, whether it's a temporary phenomenon or something that will endure.
And just to add to that, you see the interest of the big publishers because they're buying attribution models, and that sure as hell tells you that they are keen to understand and protect the value which they deliver in the overall ecosystem. Yeah. And I don't mean by that, I don't just mean cross-device, I mean broader attribution.
For sure. So I think we've only got time for 1 or 2 more questions, but there's one on KPIs or success metrics in the mobile world, and kind of how you help companies, marketers, kind of identify the right mobile-specific success metrics for a campaign, and how you balance between things that are maybe more mobile-only, like application downloads and installs, versus metrics that kind of apply across screens and media.
And I think that starts with good campaign design to begin with on an overall basis. Clear understanding of what objectives you expect from the campaign, clear understanding how each media within the campaign contributes to that, and how the consumer moves through those different media to come to a solution which come to a purchase which you want them to, or to come to a brand choice that you want them to. And that's the systems thinking piece of what we did in Mediacom. But I think it's also about, once you've done that, understanding what the role is of each channel and setting the KPIs to appropriate to that. And I do think that, as Fred said, some of this stuff is temporary because as a lot of the digital interaction we have becomes mobile, or all of it becomes mobile, actually it becomes less of an issue on what are my KPIs on desktop and what are my KPIs on mobile. I don't know, Fred, do you want to?
No, I think you mentioned downloads or performance metrics on mobile. Before joining S4M, I was the CEO of a digital performance agency called Performix, so very much focused on performance with a focus on precisely those KPIs: how many downloads, how many installs, and at the end of the day, my view is that those KPIs are probably not the right ones to follow. It's quite easy, in a way, to get downloads or get installs for apps. It's not a problem. We can get those downloads quite easily. There's ways to get those downloads. At the end of the day, what's important is actually the lifetime usage of the app. How many times the user is going to engage with those apps. That's much more valuable for an advertiser than just knowing that that number of people have actually downloaded their app. I think that's much more valuable. And in order to get to that sort of lifetime value usage of the app, I think there's many different other ways than just focusing from the beginning on CPA or CPI or whatever. I think, a branding campaign, reach, and then retargeting on users that have shown interest in that particular product, and then retargeting those individuals with closing the funnel, with more conversion, creative unit. This is much more valuable because we know that the downloads of those users will actually have value for the advertiser.
Yeah, and I'd add to that last point that when you think about unlocking more money for the mobile ecosystem, reach is something which is not always well understood by advertisers in mobile, and there's a lot of technical barriers to that. I understand that, but one of the challenges is if what you're looking for is an advertiser is incremental reach, and a lot of the big CPGs are looking for that. Being able to understand how much reach you get from your campaign, de-duped properly, and how incremental that is to other channels is a really important part of understanding effectiveness. So when we think about measurement, there's some which mobile does really well, which are mobile specific, but there's actually some which are measures which are broader across all the channels, which the industry is perhaps not focused on enough.
Great. So I think we have time for one more question, and it's a good one because it sort of brings us back to the first topic that you both talked about, which is the user experience and kind of building mobile ad experiences that consumers will love or at least tolerate. You talked about personalization and relevance around kind of respecting the intimacy of the device, around frequency capping as good tips. Are there any other sort of practical kind of recommendations you have as far as kind of creating those kinds of ad experiences that will be welcome?
Well, I think one of the things that advertisers need to look at is the incentives which they put into the system of their agencies and publishers. Because the reality is that when we think about the developments which have happened particularly in the digital space and in mobile in the last 10 years, we've poured more and more data and understanding into the way that we target people and the amount of knowledge we have of individuals before we choose whether to bid on them in an RTB situation, whether to drive an exposure of our creative. The reality is we don't use that same data to develop the creative. So if you go back to kind of marketing 101, you'd say maybe 20 to 30%, I probably shouldn't say this working in a media agency, but 20 to 30% of the campaign success, variability of campaign success, is a great campaign, it's a poor campaign, probably comes from the media. 70 to 80 will come from the creative messaging, if you look at a channel like television. That's what makes it really stand out. And we don't use all the data which we've accumulated in deciding whether to target that individual in a digital space or in a mobile space. We don't use all that data often to determine what creative we should use. Yes, it's starting with, as Fred was saying, dynamic creative optimization, digital creative optimization. But we don't really pay attention to that in the same way as we do to targeting. And the reason for that, I think, is that the way that the incentives are driven in the creative industry, the creative agency side of things, they're not well remunerated for producing display ads for mobile. In fact, many of them would not like to do it. The digital agencies, they're also not particularly well remunerated for it often. And the reality is, I think clients need to look at the incentives that they put into their systems they'll remunerate well for great website build, well that's important, but actually if you're not driving traffic to it, it's a waste. They'll remunerate well and spend millions of dollars creating TV ads, but not the same amount creating the right kind of personalization in the digital ecosystem and the mobile ecosystem. So for me, it's not really a piece of practical, like this is a great example of a format or something like that. I think that we need to think about the way we use all the data which is trapped in the media world to produce better creativity, which is more relevant for individuals.
Great answer. Fantastic. Fred, lastly from you?
Well, I would just add that at S4M we're actually developing our own creative. We have our own studios developing awesome ads, HTML5. Just recommend people on this webinar to come back to me, ask me to showcase our creative library, and they'll see in real what awesome engaging ads are on mobile.
Great. Might be a good topic for a next webinar. But with that, we're out of questions in the queue, so I'll pass things back to John.
Great, and thank you to both of our expert panelists today, and to Joe Laszlo, and obviously to all of you for attending and for your attention today. That wraps up this IAB webinar. This session will be archived on the IAB website shortly, probably within 24 to 36 hours. So please check back in often, see our full calendar of events and webinars at IAB.com, and we look forward to seeing you on our next webinar soon. Thanks so much.